Most of the things that I post on a podcast here are evergreen items, and informational, but this is a little bit of an op-ed, if you will. It's basically a proposal I have on dealing with the high volume of bills in the legislature, since my suggestion for reducing bill limits in the legislature doesn't appear to be taking hold. So I wanted to put something else out there, which is how about requiring bills to be introduced at least 1 month earlier in the year? Now, what would this proposal require? First, it would require legislators and their staff to consider and decide upon their likely legislation in November and December, and then submit those proposals to the Office of Legislative Counsel a month or so earlier. Now, while some offices do that already, many others would have to adjust their schedule. Now, my proposal would also mean that trade associations and labor unions and lobbyists and their clients and other interest groups that want to have a bill introduced will have to start their processes earlier as well. They'll have to develop their bill ideas and background papers and draft legislative language earlier in order to submit them to legislators for earlier consideration. It also require the attorneys at OLC, the Office of Legislative Counsel, to draft these bills earlier. And so once they're introduced by the third week in January rather than the third week in February, then policy committees would start bill hearings at least a month earlier as well. Now, we would keep the current deadlines for House of Origin committees, which would be an additional month worth of hearings. This proposal would also require bills to be spread out more and use that additional month so that fewer bills would be heard at each committee. And in that way, I would hope each policy committee could reduce the hearing bill load, which would allow committee consultants to have more time to analyze bills and write more detailed analyses, because consultants are forced to rush analyses because there's just so many bills and relatively few hearings. Also, I would hope that this proposal would allow the committees to loosen the reins on testimony and allow additional witnesses to testify, allow more time for those witnesses to speak, and also to provide adequate time for legislators on the committees to actually discuss and debate the bills before they cast a vote on them. In my opinion, since roughly 40% of the introduced bills today are spot or intent bills anyways, I doubt that number will go up much more under this proposal. The legislative leaders could also advance by a month the due date for amending spot or intent bills. Now, ideally, this proposal would be improved by reducing the current bill limits in the state Senate and state Assembly, and perhaps we will still see such a proposal in the 2024 session. But in the meantime, I would be curious what folks have to say about this particular proposal as an alternative.